Hi, everybody. So I'm back for the last recorded lecture of this week, and that's on event volunteer recruitment and management. So here we go. All right. As you see on bottom left, the first two lectures were about TV and media services, and then about the commercial marketing aspects. And now we're on to event volunteer recruitment and management. That's also what the little weekly assignment is about. And then in the Zoom session on Thursday, we'll talk about digital communication or media strategy and enhancing the fan experience. So let me go right into that. There we go. Get out of the way. All right. Obviously, as you know, volunteers are a super important part of every sporting event, and not just sporting event, but in sport in general. But as far as sporting events go, volunteers play such an integral role, and without them, hardly any event would be possible. So here's a small video about the volunteering program at the FIFA World Cup in Russia.
It's really astonishing feeling. No one can describe it. It's the best feeling ever in the world.
This is my country and I really love that people come to us. It's so wonderful.
The World Cup is all about positive things. It was amazing, the positive vibes, on the streets, in the stadiums with them. I saw all these red shirts everywhere. It's unbelievable, the job from these guys. And if we can say that the FIFA World Cup in Russia is so successful, it's because of these guys.
I'm a medical doctor. I work in the emergency department. I love football, and this is the biggest event in the world. It's a dream come true. Like what FIFA says, say no to racism, there's nothing related to it. It's respect everyone, and it's beautiful. It's a very good way of getting people from different countries together.
Me sinto feliz, né? Porque eu só dou uma porcentagem pequena do trabalho que eles fizeram. O trabalho que eles fizeram é um trabalho árduo, um trabalho difícil que não começou hoje, começou há muito, acho que 4 anos atrás. Então, e a vontade, né? A vontade que eles têm de sempre fazer o melhor e tentar fazer com que esse Mundial fosse um dos melhores mundiais que se tinham visto até hoje.
Thank you, because with you, the World Cup now is a reality. You are the blood, the soul, and the heartbeat of the World Cup.
In Munich, where I was born and grew up, 2006, there was the World Cup and they were looking for volunteers. I really liked it and it got me highly addicted. I was World Cup 2010 in Johannesburg, 2014 World Cup Rio. Now I'm here. I love football and it's one of the greatest experiences in my life.
I'm proud of my country and this program will change my life.
Я действительно горжусь волонтерской программой, горжусь волонтерами, которые помогают в организации проведения чемпионата. Они классные, это самая многочисленная команда. Они помогают нам своими улыбками, своей самоотдачей, своей преданностью делу. Спасибо волонтерам!
All right, so that video gives you a little taste or a little reminder, as I'm sure you're already quite aware of it, of the importance of volunteering at an event and also of what an amazing experience it can be. And there was a young man there who talked about being from Munich and having volunteered at all these different World Cups after the one in Munich, and that we find in a lot of the bigger events that people, for example, in Rio Olympics, there's a lot of volunteers from London and even Greeks from Athens still, which was 12 years earlier. London was 4 years earlier, and so on. So a lot of people, once they volunteer for big events, they keep coming and coming. Of course, I know it's a different reality in your national context. You don't always get the same excitement and eagerness to volunteer, but hopefully you also are able to mobilize volunteers to help, not just in your sport and in the clubs and in the coaching, but also at your events. So I want you to look at your own experiences working with volunteers, and hopefully you can share some of that on Thursday in the Zoom session. Also, I want to encourage you or ask you to take a look or take a read at chapter 11 from the booklet or document Working with Volunteers in Sports, which I've included in the folder, in the material where you find this video and the presentation. You'll also find the whole booklet, and it's a whole book, but it's all about working with volunteers in sports. You're welcome to look at other parts of it. It's quite lengthy, but I would encourage you for this purpose to read chapter 11. That's just 9 or 10 pages. And that one, chapter 11, is really about volunteering at events or working with volunteers at events. In there, they give a lot of examples of best practice, some tips on do's and don'ts, which also I'm sure you yourself have as well, and I hope you can share as well with us on Thursday. Just quickly, maybe a couple of points about designing or preparing a volunteer program. Obviously, this isn't for the bigger the event, the more so this can't be done from one day to the next. Here you can see an example for the UEFA Euro 2016, the European Championship. Their timeline for their volunteer program, their event took place in June 2016, and they started the sort of putting the program in place from January 2015. So it's a whole year and a half ahead. So the first part of the phase is the first phase is all strategic, and the second one becomes operational. So they start with planning their volunteer program, defining the numbers and profiles of volunteers that they need. Then they go on to recruiting volunteers and the ones who agree to work for the games or who apply to work for the championship. Then they get assigned to roles. Next, they have to be trained in their roles and the integrated into their team. As well as being put in uniform and equipped and so on. Then comes the actual, in June 2016, you can see down here the actual operational management of the volunteers, which is what happens during the event itself. And then after comes a debriefing or assessment of legacy. And while not every event is the same, the type of phases that you need to put in place a volunteer program are always quite similar. Here's another example of a totally different event. That's the Rio Olympic Games, which took place in August 2016. So again, here they start in January of 2015. So that's over a year and a half, a year and 3/4 ahead of time. So they had to scope the volunteers, meaning what again, define how many they need and what types and for what roles. Then they have to attract them, so do some promotion to recruit them. Then volunteers might apply or call in, and then they select them. Next, in phase 4, they allocate them. They do their schedules for during the games. Obviously, Olympic Games are 3 weeks long, so then they have to have shifts and schedules. Then they get their final assignments and invitation letters, and the communication with them starts with the newsletter. Then they get rostered, meaning exactly for their shifts. Then they have to be trained in the roles that they will perform. Then they need to be accredited and put in uniform, and then they will deploy, meaning they will start working, and they need to be led and managed. So you see, very different event, quite a similar process. Oops, sorry, I jumped ahead. So yeah, between the two, you can see quite similar. I mean, obviously the Olympic Games are much more complex, and these are a little bit similar, but these are always sort of the different steps you can envision. So to summarize, what are the important steps in a volunteer program? So there's a need assessment. How many do you need and for which roles? So you need to think about your entire staffing plan. What roles do you need to fulfill in your event, and which ones of them can be fulfilled by volunteers? And this will very much depend on the nature of your actual event. Then you go on to recruit them, select them. You have to know by which criteria. For example, if you need to have volunteer van or bus drivers, obviously they will need to have a driver's license, maybe some driving experience, and so on. So you will always need to probably your team liaison officers, team hosts. It'd be good if they speak the language of the team they're hosting. So these would all be criteria by which you select the volunteers. Then usually they go through a general training, and they receive obviously accreditations and uniforms. And then usually you also have, if you have depending on your event and your stadium, it's always good to have a venue-specific training, meaning you actually show them the venue, where everything is, where their job will be, where other things will be, so they get oriented, and the role-specific training. So that's a training that they actually have in their role. If they're going to be a bus driver, they need to obviously, they know already how to drive a bus because you're going to select them already knowing, but they probably need to be trained on which route to drive, where to pick up, where to drop off, and so on and so forth. And that goes really for every role. And then comes the deployment, where they actually go and do their jobs. And during that time, they need to be managed. Every staff, as you know, needs to be managed, but especially volunteers. You need to support them in their jobs. You need to help them, and you need to make sure that they are okay, that they have their lunch breaks, their dinner breaks, so that if they're cold, they get a jacket, that they're not stuck in the 40-degree heat in the sun all day, that they get rotated around, and so forth. And with that comes also retention, especially when you have a longer event than just a couple of days. You don't want to start out with all the volunteers and then lose them partway through, because some of your operations might then actually be in jeopardy. They won't work without those volunteers. So you need to think about retention, how to make sure, as I said, that they're comfortable, that they're actually enjoying themselves. And then there's all kinds of little tricks and programs you could do for volunteer retention. They could get little gifts on different days. They could get prizes. You could have maybe little social dinners or gatherings with them, so they enjoy themselves, because they are giving their time for free. And in order for them to enjoy the experience and to come back every day and maybe come back for future events, that's really important. And then, of course, comes the debriefing and evaluation, and it'd be good if you can do that both with them. How was their experience? What did they enjoy? What would they like to see improved? And then also from your side, debriefing and evaluation, both about the individual volunteers, what perhaps there's any in there that were particularly good or particularly bad, but also did you staff them correctly? Were your roles assigned correctly? Did you have enough volunteers? Did you have too few? Were your shifts okay? And so on. Now, this brings us to the practical exercise for this week, which we're going to ask you to do a little something of your own. This doesn't have to be a super long paper. Just write down a few points for each. Try and design your own volunteer program for a real event or a fake event of your own choice. You can base this on an event you might have upcoming, or that you've already had, or you can come up with a fake event that you might be hosting. But I would advise you maybe to pick a real event you'll be hosting sometime in the future, because maybe it can actually be useful for you. So make sure to include the needs assessment. How many do you need and for which position? Recruitment and selection. How and where are you going to recruit, and how will you select them? Equipment. What will be provided to them in terms of uniform, equipment, anything else? Training. How and when will you train them? Then any details about deployment and management. How will you manage them? Who will manage them? And so on. And then something about retention. A couple ideas how you can motivate them to stay on board. As I said, it's enough to just write a couple of sentences or bullet points for each of them, and just give it some thought, think it through for how you would organize it and make that happen. All right, that brings us to the end of the prepared lectures for week 2. So we've had TV and media services, commercial marketing, that whole package, volunteer recruitment and management was just now, and also the little weekly assignment is about that, due next Friday. And then on Thursday, soon we'll go through digital strategy and enhancing the fan experience, and hopefully we'll also have time for you to share some of your thoughts and points on the 3 video lectures and these topics, and also about your assignments. All right, so I hope you enjoyed the lectures and these were interesting, and I look forward to seeing you all in Thursday's Zoom.